everybody, and welcome back to the Chilluminati podcast, episode 173. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Mike Martin, joined by the Tom Hanks and that dog from Turner and Hooch of LA.
Hooch!
Jesse and Alex.
Hooch!
What?
Isn't the dog called Hooch?
Yes.
Yeah, the dog from Turner and Hooch.
Hooch.
Yeah, and he's saying that one of us is Turner, one of us is Hooch. Based on names alone, I don't think I could be a Hooch.
Why not?
I think Alex is the Hooch.
What's wrong with you being Hooch? There's no
I think
reason
you're more
that
of a
I
Hooch.
I'm Hoochie?
Could I pull
You're a
off
Hoochie
Hooch?
mama?
No. You could pull off Hooch.
How does he get Hooch? He ends up with the Hooch?
I don't even think I could pull off Turner.
Yeah. Isn't he a cop?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about this.
What's the one with the monkey?
I don't know which. Mathis, which one of us is the fucking dog?
I've never seen the movie, so I don't know.
Yeah, that's fine. Yours is good.
I'm going to go Jesse then. Jesse's the dog.
I'm the dog?
You're
Damn.
Hooch.
You're Hooch, dude.
I'm no Hooch.
I'm no Hooch. I'm no Hooch. I can't live.
What do
you mean the one with the monkey?
There's one with the monkey. Is that
With
BJ
who?
and the BJ and the bear? Is that one?
BJ and the bear.
Oh, didn't we bring that up in our Ed Boon series? Like the monkey shit.
Also, Turner and Hooch is like young, attractive Tom Hanks and the ugliest dog I've ever seen. The ugliest, saddest dog.
That's literally the movie. That's the movie. You just pitched the movie just now.
Handsome young Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
And the ugliest dog you've ever seen.
Fresh off of Mazes and Monsters.
They also remade the movie, which is just the worst thing I've ever seen.
No, isn't it? Wasn't it a
That's right.
show?
Yes, they
Yeah,
remade it with that guy from
Drake
that
and Josh or
Nickelodeon-
whatever that show. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
the one that wasn't a criminal.
Drake and Josh. What?
Yeah.
Turner and Hooch? Really?
They
Yeah,
remade
the
it.
Turner and Hooch rebooch, baby.
The reboot?
Reboot.
Get out of
The
here.
rebooch.
The reboot.
Disney's
Love
Turner
that.
and Hooch.
Being a child star does it to you, man.
Yeah.
That's called druggies.
What? I didn't know that. Or I do lots of it. I am a drug omancer.
Oh, actually, that's probably not true. I'm looking at it now. His normal photos look great, but the stock photo of him they used for the new Turner and Hooch movie, he just looks sad. And I
looks
think that
rough.
makes him look, yeah.
He's just like,
Yeah.
it's for the paycheck.
But his normal photos, I'm looking at him, he seems like a normal looking dude, although that could be editing, but you'd imagine they'd edit the posters, whatever. Why are we talking about this?
He's married
What
with
is
a
going
kid.
on?
I know that.
Hey, you know what we should talk about instead?
Patreon.com/Chilluminati
There you
pod.
go. There you save
Yeah,
us.
you know what? Let me tell you something about Patreon.com/Chilluminati pod. It is a fine place to go
Thank you for that.
For
all kinds of stuff.
like what?
If you want to go there, listen. I mean, if you're begging me to tell him, I guess I must.
I'm
You know
so
what I mean?
begging you.
I tried to reel it in, but you know what? Here,
No,
I'll tell
I'm
you what.
begging. Please.
Okay, you know what? Minisodes. You get ad-free episodes. You get art. You get pre-sale. What kind of place isn't it? And you know what else? Rotten Popcorn just came out, and it's our new show all about movies where we watch really strange movies. I'm gonna say something though. Real talk. The movie that we watched recently was called Running with the Devil. It's on Netflix. That shit was nuts.
Yeah.
Fucking insane
Loved
movie.
every minute of it.
God, man, that had me on the edge of my seat from
Yeah.
start to finish. And the way that documentary ends is unfair. Like, I won't say anything. You
It's
go
great.
watch it. It's the newest Rotten Popcorn up on Patreon.
Yeah.
But that movie ends, and I think I screamed. Like, that was insane. That whole fucking thing was nuts.
If you don't sign up for the Patreon, you can get that episode of Rotten Popcorn sometime in the very distant future.
about
What do you-
6 months.
Yeah, about
But
6
hey,
months
another
from
one
now.
just came out if you are not on Patreon, and it's the one we watched the original Zach Baggins masterpiece. My
Yeah.
goodness.
That's for everyone. That's already,
Yeah.
you already have that. You're welcome.
That's out right now.
Thanks to
And my God.
patreon.com/Chilluminati pod.
That was another good one, though. That documentary was another good choice. The Ghost Hunters one. The
I-
Ghost Adventures, rather.
It riled me just the right amount.
Yeah. Yep. They also need to go one place else, Alex.
Oh, yeah? Is that right? Is it Los Angeles, California? To see us in real life and go buy your 6 for $1 or whatever it is, glow-in-the-dark vampire fangs at Target so you can put them in for Alex's big smile 1 minute
All
into the
6
show.
fangs? Like some sort of shark?
Put them in your mouth, put them in your eyeballs like that dude from the Sandman, put them in your ears. You know?
Oh, you
Get
have
it
two
all.
little hands? Hand
I
like
want to take a picture of the whole crowd with them smiling teeths because now this stupid random thing you said off like the top of your head in one
Whose fault is
episode.
Whose fault is it really? Nobody
Yours.
knows.
It's
Mine.
your fault. Yeah.
Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe.
I'm gonna have to before the show starts. I'm gonna have to check and make sure everyone has their teeth in. So I will
Are
be
we gonna
doing
bring extra teeth just to be
at
safe?
the door kisses to make sure everyone's teeth are in.
Open mouth kisses though, because you have to see.
Well, I gotta put my tongue in there to make sure the teeth. Right. Like that checks out.
Yeah.
Alex was like, no.
Let's just debrand this to the Big Smile. I don't want this to have my name on it.
Alex's big smile.
Let's
Hashtag
just
tested by Jesse.
Hashtag. Let me test it with my tongue. That's all I'm saying.
This is called Chilluminati presents the Big Smile.
No, Alex's big smile.
Yeah.
This is Alex Fasciani presents the Alex Big Smile at the Alex Show live.
That's
Alex.
That's a little confusing, I think, for the people.
No, not confusing at all.
All right. Well, come to that. Chilluminatipod.com. Buy your tickets now. They're great. Just like Frosted Flakes.
I do like Frosted Flakes.
Yeah. They're great.
What's your favorite cereal?
What's my
Don't
favorite
worry about
cereal?
health. Favorite cereal. Don't worry about health.
My favorite cereal?
Yeah.
Killers.
Oh! Boys, after what was actually a bit of a bigger break than I expected from true crime, looking at aliens, cryptids, historical mysteries, all kinds of good stuff. Weed, is that what you said?
Huge feet.
Feet, yeah, big feet. I think you said
Huge.
weed. And I was like, what are you,
Weed.
when were we examining weed?
Dude,
I
I've
don't
been
remember that.
examining weed for the last 15 years, bro.
But with all that said, it's finally time to return to true crime because 2022 is the year of true crime, if you forgot. So with my continuing journey to broaden your knowledge of these things, even if it's unwillingly at this point, I want to continue hitting what I would consider the like classics of serial killer, the thing that sits in pop culture, the ones that sit in pop culture the most. Much like John Wayne Gacy, today's topic focus is one that I'm absolutely certain the both of you and probably the majority, if not every listener, knows about. And that's Jeffrey Dahmer.
I mean, even if you hadn't heard of him before, it's very likely that you have heard of him recently.
Yeah.
Because there's literally just last week, the week before, they launched the Dahmer Netflix show.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a huge thing. Everybody's talking about it. I keep hearing people talk about it in the wild. I'm standing there having coffee and two people are like, oh my God, have you watched Dahmer?
Yeah, apparently
that's crazy.
It's really, really good. I haven't watched it yet. I plan on watching it between this episode or next episode because it really wasn't necessary for this episode. But I'm interested to see what they do with how much fiction they throw in or how really close to the actual truth the whole show goes. I'm excited to watch it.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet, but I'm interested to have this. I've been purposely waiting because I know this is going to be more fact-based. And then
Yes,
I'm going to go
100%.
watch that afterwards and see what the vibe is.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure, like you said, the both of you kind of know the basic story. Dahmer in his little apartment where he brutally killed and tortured 17 victims while dabbling in cannibalism. It's kind of like the meat and potatoes of what people know about it. But much like Gacy, there's a whole lot more to the story. And Dahmer, in many ways, stands apart from so many of the other serial killers that we've covered and will cover on the show. So if you got we should make these serial killer bingo cards. We really should make some. I feel like it would be a great idea. Get those ready because I'm curious how many of the boxes we'll actually check off with Dahmer. And as always is the case, the series isn't here to glorify or add to the myth of Dahmer and his horrible crimes. Instead, it's more of a deeper look into the actual story, see who he actually was, and lay bare the fact that this man, no matter how he may have seemed on the outside, is and was a terrible person who should have been arrested much sooner than he was. And in that, we get to examine once again the failure of the police due to whom the victims ended up being, also known as the lesser dead. But we talk again much more about that in the second
And if you don't
episode
believe us,
later on.
just wait to hear how many times me and Jesse go, man, during this.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that.
I'm already feeling that. Are you kidding? The minute you bring up the police, I had two thoughts. One, I was like, it's always the police who are like, I guess we'll let them go. But then I also had the thought that, is that because these cases are so rare that we focus on that part rather than maybe the other times where the police catch the guy before it becomes a serial killer. But
no, because at least not in this story. No,
sure. It's just one of those things I keep thinking. I'm like trying to like come up with a reasoning before I'm like, they did it again. They screwed up again. They're just terrible at it.
Off the top of my head, I can think of 3 distinct instances they could have stopped him so much early on where they had enough evidence and reason to do so and then did not. But again, that's something we will be, and that's the point of this. You know, we're going to be looking at. Yeah, it's going to be super fun. I can't wait. It's just we'll be examining that police failure further. What makes Dahmer so fascinating as a serial killer is how many of us can kind of see ourselves in younger Dahmer. His social awkwardness, his very deep loneliness. The difference is that we don't all go off and become horrible fucking serial killers to cope with our own issues. It's also the reason I think and believe the Dahmer story is one that's so often told and retold over the decades. As Jesse just said, Netflix just released another Dahmer story onto their service a week ago to join the dozens of others out there that have kind of come out over the decades. After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a freaking catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless at just $15 a month, I obviously thought what the catch was. But after talking to them and using their service for the second time now, it all made sense. There isn't one, but it makes sense that there isn't one. Listen, Mint Mobile's secret sauce, as they call it, is that they're the first company to sell wireless service online only. They cut the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. And when you think about that, that makes a whole lot of sense, right? Logic. It connects in the brain lobes there. Mint Mobile hooked me up with a plan, and I've gotten to try their service comparative to my old service. And what I'll tell you is 2 things. 1, I am saving like $70 a month on my phone plan compared to my old phone plan, which has been awesome. And 2, the service is just as good, if not better, in other areas. And if you hate your phone bill like I did, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. All plans come with unlimited talk and text, plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone number along with all your existing contacts. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service, again, starting at only $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/chill. It's literally that simple. mintmobile.com/chill. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/chill. I'm not kidding. It saves me so much money. Even to this day, he's a fascinating person to kind of look at as a study, as he bucks so many of the trends that serial killers tend to fall into. And in that, he kind of becomes easier to empathize with on a surface level, but that's not who he truly was. Deep down, like so many of the others, Dahmer was a monster not worthy of any sympathy whatsoever. He, much like many other serial killers, was just excellent at putting on an act. So, with all of that said, a quick shout out to our primary source for this specific episode, the book called The Shrine of Jeffrey Dahmer, written by Brian Masters. This thing came out in 1993. It's just a very good, like, solid true crime read of an examination of the crimes and his family and kind of where he came from. And I wholly recommend picking it up for yourself if you can get a copy of it. You can get a softcover copy of it really cheap and easy. The hardcover copies are way more expensive and harder to find. But if you want to read, I definitely recommend it. As is always the case with any of the serial killers we do, we're not going to start this story off with Dahmer himself, but with his parents, as we typically have in the past. Married on August 22nd, 1959, Lionel Herbert Dahmer and Annette Joyce Flint had hoped for a new life together after a short period of dating. Both of them, however, as we'll find out, were far from a good match. Lionel was glued to his work as a chemist, paying little attention to his new wife and spending most of his time within the labs doing work. while Joyce, on all accounts, seemed to be what you would consider either a textbook narcissist or a textbook, someone whose textbook, their insecurity rules their life. Her own father was a detached alcoholic, and Joyce would go on to say that even as a child, she feared complete abandonment. So in that, she was very demanding and needy of her husband's time, and Lionel was not really willing to bear that much free time in the first place, which of course would immediately lead to argument after argument and a tense marriage from the start. Shortly after being married, though, Joyce and Lionel would find themselves pregnant with their first child. The pregnancy would be very rough for Joyce, finding herself bedridden from February to March with nausea, and was forced to quit her job as a consequence of how sick the pregnancy made her. As the pregnancy wore on, her muscles would contract and tighten, eventually tightening so bad and causing such severe pain that their doctor, Dr. Dean Spires, I love that name, decided to give her a muscle relaxing injection. This is they were like 1959, 1960 at this point. So like, yeah, he basically had to give her a muscle relaxing injection, and because all her muscles were just like completely contracted all the time. Joyce, yeah, it's really weird. I've never heard of anything like that happening. If any of you listeners out there have known or family members or have experienced something like that, I'm curious how common it is. Like that through the pregnancy, your muscles just get tight. It seems awful.
Did they mention is like all of her whole body?
They just said her muscles. So they didn't really specify as to like what it was, where on her body, just that her muscles would tighten and cause pain. I would imagine it was probably stomach muscles, would be my guess.
So one time when I was in high school, I was in a play, and I don't know why this lady told me this. Maybe I've said this on the show before. I can't remember. But she was like,
this so far sounds unique. I've never.
She was like sewing up my costume or something while I was wearing it. She was like making it fit my arms or something, right? And she was like telling me about when she had her daughter, and she was like, "Oh man, it was crazy. I was throwing up my own shit. I was squeezing my muscles so hard."
Oh God! Why did she know you? This lady?
Not really. But I was like, "Whoa, that's really interesting." Like I don't know. I don't know why that's like what she decided to tell me.
Jesus.
But I was like,
that's
whoa.
a random thing to just share with a child.
I never forgot that. I mean, I was like 17 or something when I heard that, but it just
yeah, you're old enough to hear it, I guess.
Yeah, but it's just
so weird.
Yeah, like so maybe those muscles can squeeze pretty hard. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, clearly. Well, thank you for that, Alex. I now feel further educated in pregnancy. So Joyce, having a rather rough pregnancy, was open to complaining quite a bit. She would bitch about how loud their neighbors were. They lived in an apartment complex. She would say hearing people's pots and pans became intolerable to her. And she would berate Lionel so much so for all of this that he eventually just gave up and boxed up all their belongings and moved them in with his family member, Catherine Dahmer, with his wife, who was at that point now 7 months pregnant with their first child.
The Dahmer family.
The Dahmer family, yeah. It's kind of weird to hear it in a context that it doesn't involve him.
Right.
7 months in, with the pregnancy, he just gave up, quit the apartment, and moved in with his family just because she would not stop bitching every single day. But luckily for Joyce, on May 21st, 1960, her pregnancy would finally come to an end as Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born at the Evangelical Deaconess Hospital in Milwaukee. And for the first time in their marriage, already you're like, I see both of them took a big breath. And
I'm thinking to myself,
sighed.
Man, Jeffrey Dahmer was born, man. Oh, man, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh, man.
That guy sucks, man. Oh,
he does.
I don't want him to be alive in this story. Oh.
Well, it'll be interesting because little Jeffrey Dahmer is very different from the Jeffrey Dahmer that kind of he turns into at age 14.
Little Jeffrey Dahmer is the worst character on Muppet Babies.
You already pitched a show. Like you just say the words little Jeffrey Dahmer. And he's got the little
go knocking on Netflix's door. I've got a great idea for a prequel sequel.
He's got the little Stewie Griffin
little Jeffrey Dahmer. All right, we'll work on that. We can tool that for a little bit. Little Jeffrey Dahmer. I can't. Now I hear like the Muppet Babies theme song in my head.
Dahmer. Yeah, it's there.
Oh God. Well, with Dahmer now born, for the first time in their marriage, having Jeffrey seemed to bring a bit of peace about the house and family. almost as if their issues with one another went on pause. Joyce started to scrapbook, marking every little advancement her kid had, and Lionel seemed less attached to his work as they were more entranced by their new son.
Imagine how fucked up your life is if Jeffrey Dahmer showing up calms you down.
Like, imagine giving him birth and he's just emotionless as he's born, not crying. He's just staring at the doctor dead in the eyes. But yeah, like that first year genuinely, seemingly seemed to be like a normal year of life for them. But eventually the magic of a new baby would wear off, kind of like honeymoon phase with a kid, I guess. Slowly but surely, Lionel found himself at the labs more and more, while the demanding schedule of being a mother took its toll on Joyce, driving her into nervous breakdowns and anxiety attacks. She was so fed up with the demanding schedule of being a mother and feeding her own kid that she bound her breasts and no longer allowed her infant child to feed from her, which caused a huge argument between her and Lionel. Yeah, she just was like, no more titties for you, Jeff. You're done. And he was not even a year old. Like, he was still...
That's like if there was like 3 more rows of bingo, might be on the list. But
I feel like this is one of those we just like scratch the surface just a little bit, because the idea that person would be like, time to bind my boobs is like like that's a whole other thing, right? Like that isn't, you just don't do that because like, stop, I would rather you not milk of me anymore. That seems like a whole other thing.
I wasn't aware of it as a thing if it was a thing before this.
Well, now you know. She did it. And that's where my question between whether she's just simply insecure or she's insecure and a narcissist is like where kind of I struggle. It was, you know, as an example, after they had an argument about her no longer allowing, you know, her son to feed from her, Joyce, after the argument, simply walked out the front door and left. And she did not return until Lionel went out and found her laying in a nearby field of tall grass in her nightgown. So much, she was so defiant and apparently threw such a fit that her own doctor scolded her for her behavior.
What?
Dr. Dean Spires scolded her for being so impetulant, just like being a kid. And there's another example of this as well, where they had a huge argument at night, her and her husband. This actually happened before Jeff was born, early in the marriage. And after the argument, she stormed off in her nightgown again at night with nothing on her feet, hands, and it was sleeting outside. And she walked to the nearby park and sat down on a bench while sleet came down from outside in the freezing cold until Lionel came and got her. That was the only way she would go. So she just sat outside and just bared terrible weather for the sake of proving a point, it seems like. I don't know. But again, that's like narcissistic behavior.
Very Brontian.
Eventually, however, they would have to move out of their family member's home and back into a place of their own. And so they got another apartment back in Milwaukee. Lionel was now working toward his master's degree in analytical chemistry, and the move made sure he was closer to campus so he could continue his school. Also, he was working full-time at the labs as well, so he was very unavailable. Even if Joyce hated the idea, she had no choice but to move with him.
Sick.
And once moved in, Joyce once again did the complain every day about the neighbors, the noise, the pots and pans, the footsteps, anything and everything that could be heard. She made sure to inform Lionel how much she hated it.
It's like the House of Usher.
However, on the flip side, and this is where that narcissistic manipulation angle kind of comes in, Joyce was also keeping the apartment absolutely spotless and consistently sought reassurance from Lionel that she was doing a good job and that she was loved. So she's like bitching at him about all these things, but at the same time, being a housewife and trying to be great and all this other stuff, and Jeff at this point is only about 2 years old. So it's just like, it's a weird household. Jesse, you look like you're about to say
nothing.
Something.
I would just like to preempt the internet by saying, Mathis has used the word bitching as a term of complaining and not saying, in fact, that the mother was a bitch.
I bitch all the time. Like I
just putting it out there. I don't want anyone to be like, what is Mathis implying about this woman? Just putting it out there.
I just use bitching as an adjective to complain.
the internet. It's what I do for a living.
Oh, yeah.
You gotta make.
Now I'm like,
I'm on top of it, baby.
I've definitely used bitching in other ways before, like that. I'm sure of it. Like I
don't know. This is the first time I've heard this. I feel like you've got it in for her. I don't even know this woman yet, and it seems like you've got it in for her.
Both the mother
Mathis.
and the father are equally terrible people for totally different reasons. I promise.
You didn't say the father was bitching, Mathis.
Oh, we're gonna get to what the father is doing in a second. Don't you worry. It's coming. It's coming.
Nice.
So yeah, she went like out into and again, that just seems like a very insecure thing to do at the very least, that need to see that she's wanted and desired and that he'll come chase after her. No matter how bad the weather is, she'll endure it. If it means seeing that he'll physically come and get her and shows that he cares. It's just fascinating to look at it. And all this while, Jeff being 2, he's soaking this is all soaking into his brain one way or another, because they're constantly fighting at home and it's not like a peaceful house at this point anymore. So after they all moved out and they moved into their new area, again, it was a new apartment. She kept the house all super clean and all that. Little Jeffrey, we'll call him Little Jeffrey. Little Jeffrey was about 2 years old at this point and had already begun showing a big interest in animals.
Little Jeffrey, big animals?
Little Jeffrey and his big animals. He had a pet turtle that he cared for greatly, that his mother said, quote, he handled with such love and care. And now at this point, they got him a pet dog to keep him company while, at the house, since he didn't really have much of us. They didn't really go out or anything like that. The small comfort of the apartment had afforded the family would be yanked up again just 2 years later when Lionel finishes his degree and took a job at the Iowa State University. But this time it was no apartment. They were actually going to move into their very first house in Ames. And eventually, Jeff, even in that house which was out near nature, had a little bit of woods near it, being such a fan of animals, there's pictures of him and his mother where he had befriended a wild squirrel that would come to his bedroom windowsill and he would feed it food and stuff. And eventually he was able to pet it and kind of like connected with this little wild squirrel that would come by every day to hang out with him for a little bit and get food.
What?
Kind of cute. Yeah, there's a picture of him and his mother feeding the squirrel out there.
Why do I feel like you're like Chekhov's gunning me for like horrific things that are about to happen?
So, what horrible? Okay, so what gun did I put down? What horrible thing are you expecting now? Like a brutally mutilated squirrel?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, we'll see what happens. I can't spoil anything. We'll see what happens. But Jeff, for the first time, was surrounded by natures and woods, and he quickly took to exploring the nearby area with his pet dog. Just under a year after moving, things would take a rough turn for Jeff, however. In 1963, Jeff began to complain of stomach pains beyond that of just like a normal stomach ache or gas. Eventually, 4-year-old Jeff Dahmer had to be brought to the hospital to have a double hernia operation, leaving him hospital-ridden for over a week. Yeah, he had to have a hernia. He had like a massive hernia that was just causing extreme pain. When he woke up from the anesthetic and surgery, all he felt was a searing pain so bad between his legs that he asked his mother if they had removed his genitals. Now, mother didn't say what she had answered to that. We don't know. Only that's what she
Probably
said. That
no.
He asked. Yeah, well, I imagine no is the answer, but all we know is he asked, and like it was that painful for him. And,
it makes me feel horrible.
Yeah, it's not pleasant, there are people out there who do wonder if this surgery, this very traumatic experience, triggered something in him, where the surgery took place, the idea of like someone exploring his insides, hands, inside wounds. And we're going to get to that aspect in a little bit, but it's one of the theories out there. It's not one I ascribe to personally, but there's a lot of people who look at this instance and say, this is what turned him.
Like he was traumatized by surgery?
Yeah, like this surgery fucked him up so bad that it put him on a path that would eventually lead to him being a serial killer. And I don't...
Really? That seems a little bit oversimplified.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I agree with you. I agree. I don't think that that's the case either. But, just kind of putting that out there. Whatever the case, after this surgery, his parents noted that Jeff did become more insular, quiet, and to himself. That's not to say he didn't have friends as a kid, though. he and a couple of his friends would actually often go exploring long tunnels in the area, like those ones that go like concrete tunnels, that like sewerage tunnels type things.
Sure.
Because he said he liked them because they were dark and spooky. And like any kid with the chance to do something bad with the potential to get away with it, he and his friends would grab bricks and huck them through the windows of abandoned houses with his friends. Not people, the houses that people lived in, abandoned homes. But eventually they got caught for that by the cops, with the cops making a visit to the parents' home and letting the parents know, which of course he got scolded for.
Admittedly, that all sounds
for.
like normal young kid
stuff.
hijinks. Yeah.
I agree
Like
with you.
ill-advised, but not
Right.
Yeah, but I did
serial
dumb,
killer.
stupid shit as a
Yeah,
kid where that
kids
was
be
like,
doing dumb stuff all the time.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But other than that, beyond that, his fascination and love of animals and insects did continue to grow and flourish. In fact, he loved to spend his time on the outskirts of Ames, Iowa, where there was a place that did studies on barnyard animals. Later, Dahmer would learn that that place had something to do with radiation testing on the animals, but he never knew exactly what. But when he would go, his favorite thing to do was to simply stand on the outside and watch the animals for hours. His curiosity eventually would win out, and Dahmer attempted to enter one of the abandoned buildings on the testing facility property. There on the front steps as he approached lay a swath of dead mice and rats. But determined still, Dahmer approached and pushed past them, opening the front door. As he opened the front door and light poured in, mice and rats scattered across the floor, filling the floor with movement. Dahmer claims he immediately ran off, and mice and rats would even spill out of the door down the stairs as he ran away. Yeah, just an interesting, yeah, he loved to go just stare at animals. He notes one time he remembers one of the workers with a long rubber glove shoving his hand into the rectum of a cow, and he was fascinated by what they were doing, just pure interest as he watched them. It's very strange. And keep in mind, he's like 6, 5. Like, he's not like 10. He's seeing all this stuff as a young kid.
Up. It's weird.
Yeah. And remember, like, why is he going out all by himself at 5 years, 6 years old? The 1960s were a very different time. And he was living out in more of the middle of nowhere, not a lot of people around, and they kind of like know the area well. But back then, there was less concern that kids were going to get snatched off the street by strangers, people that were way more trusting back then. So yeah, just an interesting note. And again, another little red flag of like, that's kind of weird, but maybe, not necessarily something that indicates a horrible future for the kid. And at the age of 5 years old, Jeff, with another little red flag, ended up finding some bones of a long deceased animal under the house in a crawl space and became fascinated with them. He played with them regularly and called them his fiddlesticks. As he continued to play with them, he said he would begin wondering if the fiddlesticks inside other animals felt the same when they were on the outside.
What age is this?
He's 5.
I mean, I know it sounds cuckoo bananas crazy. He's like, I want to know if the fiddlesticks, but
it could just be curiosity.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Kids love bugs, and kids love, like, if they find bones, they're gonna be like, oh, bones. There are bones in me. There are bones. Like, this is kid stuff.
Yeah, none of it is.
Yeah, you have to try and look at this through the lens.
Yeah,
try to look at this through the lens of what he doesn't, not what he becomes. Just like where he is in his present life and
he's just doing kid things.
It is interesting looking back, right? Like, it is interesting.
Yeah,
that's a thing, right? But that's not us saying that. It's obvious that you're going to be a serial killer if you're into gore.
Yeah, like,
right,
kids,
absolutely not.
Kids love bugs, but I'm not terrified like a bug kid's gonna end up being the bug lord.
A bug
I
kid.
bury you in bugs. I'm not like worried about that shit. So
the bug kid versus air
bug
hypnosis.
Bug kids, they're up there.
A bug kid. I get you.
The bug kid, yeah.
We'll find you, bug kid.
It's true though. I mean, there are goths out there all over the place. They're not killers. They're just into that kind of more. I'm very much into morbid true crime stuff. Hello, I'm right here. I'm talking about it.
Right.
But at home, so we found his fiddlesticks. He's 5 years old, and his home life was continuing to deteriorate, particularly the relationship between his parents. Joyce had become so depressed and so neurotic, as the husband had described her, that she was now drinking heavily to deal with her depression and insecurity. And it's also important to note that her father was, like I said earlier, an alcoholic. Alcoholism tends to run in the family, tends to be a genetic thing. And Lionel continued to work and remain distant, dealing with the issues at home by simply not being home. In 1966, Joyce made an attempt on her life, overdosing on Seconal, but it's still debated as to whether that was an intentional attempt on her life or simply her being careless with what she was imbibing that particular day. So, but it could go either way. Still a very traumatic experience. Domestic violence even started to become part of the equation. When Joyce was screaming at Lionel and she, quote, needed to be calmed, the father would begin to hit her. Though Dahmer would note, this is interesting to kind of look at, Dahmer noted that when his father hit his mother, it was never, quote, with brutality or malice. It was simply to calm her down.
What the hell does that mean? What the fuck does that mean?
I don't know. I don't know how you hit somebody without brutality or malice.
I know exactly what that means. Boy, that's a weird thing to say.
And gaslighting the wife as he was hitting her.
It's those old movies where the woman's like, I'm losing my mind. The guy's like, snap out of it.
Yeah.
I feel like it's that kind of thing, but
I guess
it's still a crazy thing to say.
You shouldn't slap your wife for any reason.
You just shouldn't do that. But I think that's what he's trying to say.
So
that's the justification.
Husbands were hitting their wives unnecessarily a lot more often back then. Yeah, it's weird. It's a weird line, and one I definitely noted as well. It's just like how that's such a weird internalized thing.
But it does go to a state of mind of disconnection from things of that nature. So violence towards others, there's no emotion there. It was all just what I was doing or what he was doing. So
it's another little kind of just flagged plant. So as most people do when their marriage is falling apart, what do you think their cure-all answer was, boys?
Beating the shit out of their kid.
Another baby.
Bingo.
I watch Jerry Springer. I know how it works.
Lionel finished his studies and got a job in Ohio, meaning the family was about to be uprooted once more. And his wife had become pregnant again. 6-year-old Jeff didn't seem to mind moving and was more in love with the idea of having a baby brother. Even though he didn't know it was going to be a baby boy, he was very insistent on wanting a baby brother. And his mother noted that he would place his head up against her belly and say, quote, so he knows that he has an older brother, unquote. That's why he would put his face up against the belly.
That's very sweet.
Okay. Isn't that that's a very adorable
again, that's a kid thing. Like kids is cute.
Yeah, it's a kid thing.
Okay. Yeah, fine. Yeah, sure.
And she was, according to his mother, Jeffrey was so obsessed with the idea of a name that he got to name his brother when he was born. And the name he gave his brother was...
Lilberry Shoot.
Lilberry Shoot, yep. No, it's David Dahmer. David was the name that Jeff gave
Jeff
him.
Jeff knew about alliteration. I love that.
I know, right?
Yeah, it's like Stan Lee.
At this point, the parents sort of stop paying attention to Jeff and instead start paying much more attention to his now little brother, Dave. And Jeff never complained about it. He very much always kept his emotions to himself. The family moved and life continued seemingly as normal as it could. But the little red flags continued to pop up. In one instance, Jeff was roughhousing with one of his friends before his friend invited Jeff to pretend strangle him, promising that he wouldn't tell on him. Yes, you heard that right. He was invited to, they were roughhousing around, be like, you can, pretend strangle me. Like, I imagine very much like a wrestling thing.
This is like cartoonish. Like, it's like the Tom Sawyer of murdering.
It is. I can imagine, like, when I was a kid, when we'd always used to, like, play stuff, I'd always want to be the guy who got killed because I loved the death moment where you got to be like, ugh.
Yeah,
right? And I just, like,
play it up.
Be a goofball. So, like, I get it, but I'm also like, I never said strangle me.
Right?
Yeah. That didn't come until you were like 18, 19.
Right. And usually I'd have to really ask for it. You know what I mean? Like squeeze harder, right?
It's interesting. And of course, Jeff went along with it and he placed his hands on him. And as soon as he started pretend strangling him, the kid broke away, ran off and ratted him out on the teacher, which earned Dahmer 10 whacks on the ass with a paddle.
Hey.
Old school teaching. Now, here's an interesting question I want to pose for you. How true is this story? Because we obviously learned this through Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeff had many interviews, talked to a lot of people.
Like this is his
and I don't
story,
necessarily believe. I don't necessarily not believe that he strangled a kid, but I'm very curious if he was play strangling him or if like the kid didn't actually ask and Jeff just kind of went for it while they were roughhousing
And then said we were playing.
Yeah, exactly.
Did they already know that he had killed 17 people when he told them this story?
Yes. We're in the post kill aspect for this story.
So if he was already fucked, maybe it is true. You know what I mean?
Maybe. What's interesting about Dahmer, and as we'll talk about later, is like when he talks about his crimes and stuff. This is what makes him so tricky, and I think why a lot of people accidentally feel for him or empathize with him is because he always plays it like he didn't want to do it that way. He didn't want to do it. And while I think part of that is true, it wasn't necessarily that he wanted the corpse. He just didn't want to go through the act of killing somebody to get it. It wasn't the killing that he enjoyed. It was having the product afterward that he liked. And we'll get more detail about that later. So yeah, the kid ran off, ratted him out to the teacher, and the teacher whacked him on the ass with the paddle. For Dahmer, this was a mark of losing trust, of being betrayed. And that continued betrayal would continue to happen and erode in those he liked. And for example, another example, his teacher at the time that he was rather fond of. And to show his appreciation, he caught her a bunch of tadpoles from the local pond and brought them to class in a tank for her. She acted super grateful and displayed the tadpoles out in class for all the kids to see. But a couple of days later, the tadpoles were missing, only for Dahmer to discover later that they were given to another kid in class because they were all hanging out in his garage, and that's where he saw the tank that he had given her with the tadpoles swimming around. Huh. And that was another real big betrayal moment for him. And what he did though is another moment of what's going on here, because instead of being upset or crying or fighting, he simply grabbed motor oil and poured it into the tank of tadpoles, saying to himself essentially, if she doesn't want them, no one can have them. He
just went full GTA now. He just
grabbed a motor oil, blah, 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 and now, again, he's young playground. Still. Yeah, exactly. He's like 7 or 8 at this point. Now we move into about junior high, and Jeff had nearly at this point completely turned inward. Even his friends would call him pretty intelligent, awkward, and kept to himself. He seemed to show no excitement or motivation for anything, to the point where his father began to worry, asking or forcing him into sports that he was never good at and other hobbies that he never took to. But he continued to stay, like I said, a relatively calm and inward person. Very few people had become close enough friends with Dahmer at this point that he would let them into his private life. But one boy named David eventually became trusted enough by Jeff for him to be introduced to his favorite game that Jeff invented himself. And this
another David?
Not his brother David, a friend David from school.
David.
A second David, exactly.
David, not Dahmer.
Not David Dahmer. And I also find this aspect fascinating. Because it's not like we're not about to go into like his favorite game was Choke Me Daddy. It was something way weirder. The game that he created, that he introduced to David, was called Infinity Land. And the rules were fucking bizarre.
Sick.
The game involved stickmen and spirals. The stickmen were spindly figures who would be annihilated if they came too close to one another, as each boy manipulated his little army. The spirals were tightly drawn, intensely imagined symbols of descent, whose ultimate destination was basically a giant black hole. Jeffrey was 9 when he made this game up. And he would play it by himself always. David was the one and only person who got to see that game and got played with it once, and he did not take to it, and Jeffrey quickly ended the game. It's a weird game of men made out of sticks that if they got too close and they touched each other, they get sucked into the spiral and get sent into Infinity Land, essentially. I don't understand the game. It doesn't really make any sense even being explained like this. I don't even know how to look at this in terms of like, what could it mean? Could it just be another kid thing? Yeah, I would say it could be, if it wasn't stacked up at this point with all kinds of weird little things that alone could be maybe a weird kid imagination.
I mean, here's the thing. The real thing is I've made up dumb, crazy shit like this too.
Sure, yeah. We've all done really weird shit.
Like, I don't know.
And there's other serial killers who have done really weird shit that we'll talk about too. One in the future, he had like a whole imaginative, like he had a whole clan of mice that he ruled over. Very weird shit.
What do you mean ruled over? Like they accepted him as their ruler?
He named them. They were like his kingdom. He said he would speak to them and they understood.
No.
Like that kind of stuff.
He would speak like Ant-Man and the ants?
yeah, like Ant-Man. Exactly. But, you know, again, Jeffrey's 9 at this point. He makes up Infinity Land. This is something he's playing quite often. Meanwhile, the home was in further turmoil. Joyce had further descended, and she was on and off medication that made her nearly comatose. She had a fragile temper, and anything could set her off. David and Jeff had to keep to themselves, not getting in their mother's way or placing their life worries in front of her for fear of setting her off. Anything for just a little peace in the house. But that also meant keeping all their issues to themselves as to keep things calm. But as mental health tends to do, it all came tumbling down regardless of how hard they tried, and Joyce was sent into a mental institution for just over a month.
Jesus.
But her pill popping even after that never really slowed down. So we are kind of seeing the disintegration of his family at this point. Jeff, as always, because of it, blamed himself. He says there'd not been a time in his life that he can remember where his mother wasn't depressed, and he blames himself coming into existence for such. But his brother noted that Jeff often didn't open up about his feelings. Instead, what Jeffrey would do would be keep to himself and every once in a while wander off into the nearby woods, where they could occasionally hear him screaming at the top of his lungs, slamming branches of trees into other trees and seemingly destroying things. Healthy, right?
Now we're starting to get there. Now we're starting to get to the, I'm like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, things are internalizing very, very, very.
Still, a lot of this stuff, like if we did not know, if like the jig was not up on this dude ending up being a serial killer.
Yep.
This just sounds like maybe like the dude from Toy Story.
Someone's going, I mean, it's a traumatic, life experience.
Someone going through some stuff.
Yeah. I get that. But, again, kind of put up with everything else. It's kind of nuts. All the while, as the years wore on, we see in Dahmer a certain change in fascination. At one point during dinner, he asks his father, as they had chickens that they were eating that night, what would happen if they took the chickens out of the body, the chicken bones out of the body, and plunged them in bleach? And just excited that his son was interested in something.
Who used the word plunge? Him?
I use that.
Father, may we plunge the bones into the bleach?
What would happen if they put the bones in bleach? And his father, already desperate for his son to have an interest in something, now had an interest in something that was what he did. Keep in mind, his father was a chemist. So this didn't raise any red flags for Lionel, and excitedly explained to Jeffrey what would happen. And the collection of bones slowly became something Jeffrey enjoyed. Slowly, he would take roadkill off of the road, take it home, put it on the outside, and let nature take its course until the bones themselves were exposed. Then, taking those bones, bringing them home, bleaching and cleaning them, intending to rebuild the animal at some point. But it's important to note that while that was always the intention with everything he took, he never did it. He never took them and put them back together. He just kind of had a collection of animal bones.
He liked the breaking down more than he liked.
Yeah, it was more like, he liked having them in that. It's again, it started with birds and small animals and eventually worked their way up to dead dogs on the side of the road. At one point, he took the body of what he believed to be a St. Bernard corpse, put it in the backyard, and let the body completely decompose. At one point, even taking the skull, polishing it off, and sticking it on a branch outside and marking like a weird territory in a weird ritual. In another point, he took another roadkill dog, but in a weird change in behavior, did not let the wilderness take its course first, but instead let curiosity take control, slitting open the stomach, exploring the innards of the animal that had already been dead on the side of the road, and eventually splaying the animal up in a tree with the intestines pulled out and wrapped around the tree and the dog in some weird display, only to be discovered later by younger kids who were walking in the woods and found that and the skull. It was around the area where the skull was put up on a pike. Now we're getting into the area where he's taking a turn.
Yeah.
Like he just found it?
Yeah, he
That's
would
so
go looking
nasty.
for roadkill. He would
Yeah,
go
that's
looking
nasty.
for roadkill. Yeah, that was like one of his favorite hobbies to do, was to just go out and find roadkill and bring it home and do stuff with it. Because again, with Dahmer, especially as we see him age, his fascination becomes less the animal and more the workings, the inner workings of them. What makes them up? Like what is on the inside? Morbid curiosity that I think, again, any normal teenager kid would have. I mean, you do dissections in class. I mean, he got to dissect a baby pig in class and says how much he fucking loved doing it. But like you cross that line when you decorate a tree with the intestines of a dog and leave it hung up in a weird way.
The decorating, I'm like, that's a sign. But my question for people who live in rural areas is, how odd is it? And find us on r/Chilluminati pod. Let us know. How odd is it to go looking for roadkill? How weird of an activity.
I never
is that?
wanted to go looking for roadkill.
I've never felt that urge, but I also am born and raised in Los Angeles, California.
Were you ever like on a walk though and like saw like a mostly decomposed bird or something and like poked it with a stick and been like, that's cool?
Yeah, but I've
Like,
never been in an environment where I'm like, if I walk here long enough, I'll find a dead dog. Like I've never been in that type of situation. So I'm interested to know.
I will say, and I don't know if this makes me someone who could very easily snap and just kill everyone, but when I was young, when we would like in school dissect a frog, I'd always feel terrible about it. Like I'd be like, until I cut that thing open and was like, oh, what's this inside here? And what's this do? Once I was in it, I was like, oh, I'm gonna look at this.
I feel the
I don't
same
think
way.
that makes you a serial killer. I don't think that makes you even close to one.
Well,
you could have turned out to be a doctor.
like, oh, I don't want to do this. But once I'm in, do you think once I've already serial killed one person, I might as well just keep, you know what I'm saying? I just
think about eating it, whatever it is. I mean, not like dead bodies on the side of the road, but
Yeah, you don't see roadkill and go, I wonder how that would be on my grill.
Yeah, but when I'm like dissecting a frog,
many people do. There's a large contingent of people in this country that, especially in the countryside, if something just got hit, if you like hit something on the side of the road and it's dead, you can take it with you.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly kind of what I'm hinting at. I'm interested to know is it truly strange to go looking for roadkill? Sure. Or is that something that a normal person would do?
Yeah, actively go looking. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious too. Let us know in the subreddit. It's a very weird kind of, to me, a very weird hobby, if that's a hobby for people. But who knows? Maybe it's just a thing that people do. For Jeffrey at this point too, it's important to note as we get to about 14 years old, Dahmer has mostly shut away his emotions. He hasn't really been able to feel them. He says he could not remember the last time he cried. And he just dealt with things by internalizing, compartmentalizing, and detaching. And that is all he knew how to do, to the point where right around the age of 14, Dahmer didn't really know who he was anymore, but he did know that he had a fascination with corpses and a rising urge and interest in men of in people of the same sex, in men. Thanks to ButcherBox for sponsoring this episode. And if there's anything I've been able to do as an adult, as technology has gotten better specifically, it's avoid going to stores. I'm a socially anxious monster. That's why I'm a podcaster. I sit in my house by myself and talk to a microphone where nobody can look at me. And going to the grocery store was probably one of the worst experiences for me. I just hated being out there, all the people, looking at all the freaking money and just spending more than I need to. Then ButcherBox came along and was like, hey, check us out, maybe work with us. And I was like, you know what? I'll check you out. Then maybe I'll work with you. And here we are working together after I checked them out because A, they're way cheaper than going to the grocery store. And B, the meat is top notch. Getting to choose from a carefully curated selection of 100% grass-fed beef, free-range organic chicken, wild-caught seafood, and more, all delivered to my doorstep, makes me not have to go to the grocery store and save money, and it's fantastic. And obviously, ButcherBox wants to do something special for our listeners if they sign up with our link. Right now, ButcherBox is offering new members 2 free New York strips and 8 ounces of cold cracked lobster in your first box, plus $10 off. Cold cracked lobster meat from ButcherBox is wild caught by independent harvesters in the North Atlantic and then pressure extracted from the claws and knuckles, so you get the most delicious, succulent lobster you've ever tasted. ButcherBox gives me peace of mind, it's the ultimate convenience, and the value is crazy. Like I said, ButcherBox is offering our listeners free New York strips and lobster, plus $10 off of their first box. All you have to do is sign up at butcherbox.com/chill. Bam. That easy. Again, sign up at butcherbox.com/chill to get 2 10-ounce New York strip steaks and an 8 ounce of lobster claw and knuckle meat free in your first order, plus $10 off for your first box. That's butcherbox.com/chill. All of these led to frustrating moments, and around the age of 14, where he could no longer handle it, Dahmer finally picked up the bottle and began to drink. This is where I see the turning point for Dahmer. As Dahmer begins to drink, you see him fully repress who he is. Alcoholism runs in his family. This is, not super surprising. He would bring alcohol to school. He would drink at school and whatnot. And Dahmer, not knowing who he is or perhaps even hating who he is, for the first time invents a new personality. This isn't who he was, but what he wanted people to see him as.
Sure.
He became a class clown. Outward, no longer focusing inward, but focusing outward, making people laugh, having running gags. And Dahmer's schoolmates, when interviewed and asked, remember him as such. A guy who would make jokes, who would disrupt the class for a fun fart noise or say something to make people laugh.
Hell yeah.
What they didn't know is he was doing it all while he was completely inebriated. And the drinking only got worse and worse for him as life continued. His parents' marriage deteriorated to the point of eventually needing a divorce. His father hadn't even been sleeping in the same room with his mother for a couple of years at that point, and even would go out and stay in a hotel every so often. And when it eventually came to a head around the age of 15 or 16, and the divorce conversation finally happened, Dahmer wasn't ever brought up in the conversation once. But the argument as to who was going to take his little brother was. And that also sat very heavily with Jeffrey. I apologize. He would have been 17 at that point, going on 18 soon.
Well, it's possible that that's because he was 17, right?
Agreed. And that's exactly the case. But Dahmer, it's clear at this point, Dahmer takes things extremely personally. Like, again, the tadpole situation or any, where he was kind of quote unquote betrayed. And so I agree because it's he's 17, almost 18. Didn't matter. He was an adult. The legality of where he stayed didn't matter. But the kid, for David, who was at that point, he was 12 or 13, you kind of have to have that discussion, But it didn't matter. It sat with him and it ate away at him, making him feel like he was worthless. And at this point, he had his own store of pornographic magazines. All of the magazines that he owned were gay magazines, but he wasn't ever focused on the lower half of a man or his face. Dahmer's specific obsession with men was their torsos, specifically the abs and the chest. He didn't care when he fantasized and masturbated about the loving or caring aspect. He always fantasized about just having the abs there, to touch them, to caress them, to rub up against them.
Abs?
He was a man who loved a nice torso.
Abs.
That's not what that normally means, though. You know what I mean? When you're an ass man, you're not the
only ass please, no face.
Not the rest of the body, just the ass.
Yeah. Usually you want, you enjoy the rest of it.
It's a little strange, yeah.
It's important to note as well that according to Dahmer, at this point, he had actually experimented with a boy once in his life. He was 10 years old, and the child that he was messing around with was 7. And they had snuck off 3 or 4 times.
It's also, it's not what experimenting
really
means.
Yeah.
I'm giving you his words, not mine. But yeah, they would go off in the woods into their little tree houses and stuff, and they would basically just fuck around with each other at young age. And then they stopped, he said, because they both were afraid they were going to get caught. So he already knew even at a young age kind of where his sexuality was. But again, this is the 60s going into the 70s. And the internal hatred over his own desire of men was also something that was now very readily and openly eating away at him.
I feel like every time we talk about a serial killer, it always comes down to repressed sexual nature of some sort.
So yeah, there's always
violence
male
and sex
serial
are very
killers
similar.
very specifically.
And it's always like their upbringing was one where they weren't allowed to be themselves, so they murdered people. Like every time, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're playing serial killer bingo. We don't have the head trauma or any like the molestation by the parents and
but
stuff.
You did
we still have a lot.
A theory about surgery, which is some type of body trauma.
Yeah,
it is trauma.
So, like, yeah.
And he was 4. That was like very young and kind of like.
But 4?
Yeah, I know. It's weird. It's weird. But the most important aspect of this time period between 14 and 18 is when the fantasies began.
The ab fantasies?
They started as ab fantasies. But eventually he realized he just wanted the person, their body, to be there forever. He didn't want the romantic connection. He didn't want the cuddling and aftercare. He just wanted their body and to be in total and utter control of it, no matter the cost. That's what turned him on. And initially, he attempted to sate those desires by jerking off. And those would sate those thoughts for a while. But eventually, those thoughts would return. And they only became stronger as he mentally gave in and fantasized about it over and over. The fantasies eventually brought him out to a nearby road, where he would spend a lot of time just sitting and enjoying the weather, watching cars drive by. But the most important part is that there was a jogger that constantly went by the area that Dahmer regularly hung out. And the fantasies went from anonymous bodies to that of the jogger specifically. And that is what Dahmer thought about for days, weeks, and months. Until one day, he decided to give in to that urge, that fantasy. He made a decision to grab his baseball bat and wait where he always waited, where he saw the jogger every single time.
It's not good.
But as he arrived, he took his bat, put it by his side, and thought about it, fantasized about it, coming up behind him, whacking him in the back of the head, and taking him somewhere secret where he can lay with the body, lay on top of the body, run his fingers and kiss the body, and then eventually, in this version of the fantasy, leave him alive, unconscious, and hopefully none the wiser as to what happened to him. Luckily for this particular jogger, however, on this day, he wasn't on his jog, and he never came by. Dahmer let go of the fantasy after that day and never made that attempt again, spooking himself almost that he let himself go that far. And what we're seeing is a very typical serial killer ramp up, where a person who is capable of killing, who may even be having fantasies about it, don't necessarily actively go out of their way to hunt somebody down, but actively put them in a place where what they want to happen
But like,
will happen.
yes, he fucking did just hunt this dude down.
But yeah, he did go out and like wait.
Yeah.
But I'm saying like, yeah, it's a weird.
There's a part of this story that I think is interesting in that you're saying this is the ramp up, right? But there's a lot of people out there who, for whatever reason, like go to commit a crime or go to do a thing. And then just like this, the person they're going to hurt in some way doesn't show up.
Yep.
And they see that as a sign of like, boy, I lucked out. I shouldn't have, you know what? I was thinking about it. And that was just destiny pulling me away from being stupid.
Yep.
And that happens like all the time for people. And I'm curious why then this one's like, you know what? It spooked me, but I'll get him next time. It's very interesting.
Yeah, but when he did leave, he was like, no more next time. He was like, I'm not going to do that. Obviously that worked. And then he went on to live a normal life.
Yeah.
Episode over.
It
was done after that. He did try to let go of the fantasy for quite a while, not going out hunting for the jogger. In fact, he never went to that spot ever again. But eventually the fantasies were pretty much his consistent thought. And instead of thinking
this is
about
like his chicken arc where he's like,
he's going,
I could have done something else with my life, but my passion, killing.
Yeah, I mean, really. And you're going to see that again. He went off from fantasizing about it once a day and kind of like getting himself off to anywhere between 3 and 5 times a day. It's his consistent obsession. Ooh. He had bones, a ton of bones at this point, and his mind is on a one-track thought where it was going to lead to something bad. And as his parents were finalizing the divorce, one night Joyce simply took David and left the home. Lionel was left at home with Dahmer, and the next day he had to go to work. So Jeffrey drove him to work, and Jeff would have the house to himself for an entire 48 hours. With nothing but a half gallon of milk in the fridge and his own privacy, this is where he loses things completely. Jeff decided to take the car. He wanted to go for a drive. He didn't really know what he was going to do. And on that drive, Jeff came across something he hadn't come across before: a hitchhiker. Initially, he just drove right past the hitchhiker. He ignored them and
went home, and it was fine.
Yeah, tried to leave the thoughts and leave behind the urge, but he eventually caved in, slowed the car, turned around, and went back for the hitchhiker. This man's name was Stephen Hicks from Illinois. As he picked up Stephen Hicks, Dahmer told him that he wasn't going anywhere in particular, but if he wanted a place to stay for the night, he had a house and he could get him some food and a little bit of weed and some booze. The hitchhiker, not seeing a reason not to do that, decided to say okay, and Dahmer brought him home. Dahmer initially went to go get what little weed he had left and brought it up to Steve. They smoked a bit, drank, and talked. Dahmer attempted to make a move on him, but it became very clear to Dahmer very quickly that Steve was heterosexual and had no interest. But that only infuriated Dahmer. He had him here, and he had been fantasizing about having a body like his to himself for so long. He wanted him to say yes, to be willing, but he wouldn't. In that frustration and getting uncomfortable, Steve Hicks, after a few drinks, said he was going to hit the road and head out of here. Dahmer said, no problem, he'll be right back. He was just going to go get something. That's when Dahmer went downstairs and grabbed a barbell without the weights on each side. When he came back upstairs, Steve Hicks was sat in a chair back to him. Dahmer walked up, raised the barbell bar, and cracked him in the back of the head as hard as he could.
There he goes.
Steve stood up, still awake and confused, and a small fight occurred. But Dahmer was big. He quickly pinned him down and hit him again in the head to knock him out. He laid bleeding on the floor, and almost without thinking, in a pure rage, Dahmer took the bar, pressed it against that man's throat, and suffocated him to death. When he died, Dahmer simply put aside the barbell and immediately took the body to his room. There, he stripped the body, cuddled, kissed, and enjoyed what victory he had wrought for himself, enjoying the physical body more than anything else. A night of this went by before the next day he seemed to kind of come to his senses. He suddenly panicked, realized what he'd done, and knew he needed to hide his crime. So Dahmer went out and bought a brand new knife and a bunch of trash bags. Initially, while he went to go get that, he took the body and dragged it under the crawl space of the house. When he returned with the knife, Dahmer went under the crawl space along with him and slowly removed the body parts and then the head and triple bagged them all in garbage bags. After the sun went down, he took the trash bags to his car with the intent of driving them off and kind of just depositing them in random places, buried and thrown away so they'll never be found. Here's where the first frustrating moment of police action comes in. On his way, with the body not in the trunk but in the back seat, Dahmer gets pulled over.
Stop.
Get the fuck out of here.
For driving...
in the back seat?
For driving slightly left of center. As he was pulled over, the police called for backup and a second car arrived.
Oh my God.
And they asked Dahmer to come out and do the straight line test. Now remember, this is the era where there is no breathalyzer test that didn't exist.
Certainly, but you're telling me these cops didn't look in this man's car and be like, those are 3 trash bags in the back of your car. What is that?
Well,
they probably weren't thinking about it.
You make a good point. You make a very good point. This is all happening at 3 a.m., by the way. So they ask Dahmer to come out, and they have him do the walk a straight line test and so on, and he passes all of the tests. In the meanwhile, the second cop walks over his car with a flashlight in hand and flashes the flashlight into the car, openly asking what smelled so bad in the vehicle.
Fuck, man.
And Dahmer simply replied, "It's garbage he's taking to the city dump. His parents were getting a divorce and he couldn't sleep, and he was hoping that a drive at night would help clear his mind." The cop simply said,
Rad,
"Okay,
dude. Cool."
and let him go. However, after the cops had left, Dahmer did not continue down the road. Instead, the cops, I think, scared him a bit, and he turned around and went back home with the body, going back under the crawl space and burying it all in a shallow grave. Days would go by, and he would stress him out that the body was under there, but in yet one last strange act from Dahmer with this body, at one point he decides to head back under the crawl space. He digs the body back up, and he digs through the bag for specifically the head. He takes the head out of the bag, reburies the body, and brings the head into his room. There, he places the head down and jerks off in front of it. He uses this head as a inspiration to take care of himself until the head became so rotted that he couldn't bear the stench any longer and got rid of the skull himself. And this is the beginning of the downfall of Jeffrey Dahmer, and we will continue next week with what happens next.
Jesus.
Like I said,
Fucking hell, dude.
a very bizarre, youth with little red flags that accumulated, really are worrying. But really, when he started drinking and he started pretending to be this class clown and everybody loved him, that's when he kind of just buried his true self, and him getting drunk would allow that true self essentially to come forward. And he always did it when he was drunk. That's something we're going to see next time, is he always had to be drunk to do it first. And he always had to be blackout drunk to do it. He truly had no interest in the remembering of it. He remembers this one because he was drunk, but he wasn't blackout drunk. But that becomes a staple of his crimes, is in order for him to basically be who he actually is, he has to booze it down because he can't deal with it himself. He's too scared of himself, or maybe there's an aspect of knowing what's right and wrong. I don't want to say guilt. I don't think it's guilt. I just think he knows he can get in trouble and maybe can get caught. It's a reason I think Dahmer is one of those figures or serial killers that really just kind of sticks around decade after decade.
I feel weird even analyzing it at all. I can't it's so strange. It's such a part of the human psyche that I just can't connect with.
Right, exactly. And compare his childhood to something like Gacy's or Granny, Nanny Doss, her horrible childhood. His was relatively, it was traumatic. Yeah. But I mean, his childhood has sounded a lot similar to mine, and I ended up fine. I ended up as a serial killer. It just is what it is. That, everybody loads of people get dealt a shit hand as a kid, and growing up isn't great, but that's no excuse to be and this is why I murdered 17 people.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where his manipulative kind of personality, I think, comes through. Lucky for that jogger, man, that jogger on that day was not there. Very, very, very lucky. Anyway.
God damn.
We'll wrap it up here, boys. Thank you for this part one of what I believe will be a 3-part series on Dahmer. We will see. We'll be back next week with part 2. We're going to go record a mini-sode for Patreon. Patreon.com/Chilluminati-pod. We love you.
It's a great website.
And we'll see you next time. It is a good website. Bye.
Bye.
Anyway, me and my wife were sitting outside indulging on our porch one night, enjoying ourselves. I needed to go to the bathroom, so I stepped back inside, and after a few moments, I hear my wife go, "Holy shit, get out here." So I quickly dash back outside, and she's looking up at the sky in awe. I look up too, and there's a perfect line of dozen lights traveling across the sky.